In our Data Masterclass podcast, data leaders share their unique stories. In this episode, we talk to Scott Taylor, who is the principal consultant at MetaMeta Consulting. Our conversation revolved around the topic of telling your data story for data management. Let us welcome your host, Alex Borek.
Hello, my data friends. I have a very, very exciting guest with me today in our Data Masterclass podcast. It's Scott Taylor, some of you know him as the data whisperer. But I heard rumors that he's not really a whisperer, he's more a data shouter. But maybe we uncover some of that during the podcast. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, spoiler alert. I don't do a whole lot of whispering. We save that for the data. Yell, tell, and sell about the power and value of data management. We got to get people's attention. So not a whole lot of whispering. No.
Not a whole lot of whispering. But the reason why I wanted you to join our show is because I think you can help out a lot of our people in our community with telling a better data story. And you actually wrote a book telling, and I put it up for those who are watching us, some of us listening, and telling your data story is a wonderful, wonderful, very fast read on everything you need to know to next time not lose everyone's attention when you start talking about data, when you're not talking to data people, but maybe to talk to your decision makers. And I think it's packed with basically a lot of stories around storytelling on data. And maybe we start off, Scott. Could you tell us a bit about, how you got there, in the first place to start to write a book on data storytelling? What was your history sort of behind it, your personal history, or your personal story behind that?
I appreciate you show the book cover, as it says right on there, 99% buzzword free. I did not want to overpromise. Got to keep it focused on the business accessible language. I was listening to the space, all this talk about data science and analytics and even data storytelling itself when it was first came out. And I'm listening to it and go, where's the voice of data management in this? I don't hear it. And it was pretty clear to me that data storytelling, as most people know it, is really analytics storytelling. Not that it doesn't have any value, but I'm just talking about the name and the vocabulary itself. And but those are great. You've got people need that. Organizations need to be able to take data and insight and put it in a business context to drive action. Super. But guess what? If you're doing that, you've already got buy-in from your organization to fund data activity. So backing it up, thinking about where data starts in an organization, thinking about what you need to get stakeholder engagement, executive leadership's attention, funding for things around data management. I thought there was room in the space, and I've been proven right by the reaction, for a data storytelling that is for data management. Data stories about the data versus data stories with data, where data starts versus where data ends up, data management versus business intelligence, truth versus meaning, which is how I boil down my entire data philosophy down to 3 words, truth before meaning. Obviously, I'm the truth team, hence the meaning of my truth hat, for those of you watching rather than listening. And just really felt there was an opportunity to establish some kind of formal voice to support the data management part of the wider data community. And so I wrote the book during COVID. It was my COVID project. I'd been thinking about doing a book for a while and I didn't realize how long the whole COVID thing was going to last and lockdown and all the rest of it. But I did have a sense early on, I'm never going to get this kind of time again. Everything canceling, the whole calendar clear for at least the summer. Had a very hard conversation with myself and said, either write the book now or shut up forever, because this is it. This is your opportunity. So I'm glad I stepped up to myself and my own challenge and put it together. And it's been a ball. It's been really well accepted, and appreciate your appreciation of it. And
I'm very glad that you took the discipline, and it takes discipline to write a good book. It's a lot of pain that you need to go through until you have that final product. And I think you can be proud of it. And I think it's so important for our community. Now, let's just digest, what you just said. So basically, I fully agree with you. When we heard about data storytelling, most people were rather talking about telling a story with data, which means that you take some data that explains something about your business, and maybe you then tell, for example, a story why revenues are going up or down, or why, let's say in another context, children have better education or worse education in certain areas based on that data.
Right.
Now, that is very important. We all agree that that's useful. Now, the problem that most companies have is, though, when they become a certain size, things get very complex, and creating something with data becomes very hard because the data itself is not really fit for doing that, or creates problems. So that's why we need data management, obviously, to help a lot of people to tell stories with data in the company. But that is also very abstract. Because it's
much
sort
less
of
tangible. Yes,
it's much less tangible.
Absolutely agree.
And that's why so many people struggle. I mean, I found personally in my life as data leader, it's been always much easier to tell the story of how we build AI products and do cool stuff with AI, or how do we empower more people with analytics, and build basically dashboards and things like that. But it's been always the hard sell was really on the data management part. And I found it interesting in your personal story that we briefly talked before this podcast. You told me about all your career at Nielsen, at D&B, Duns and Bradstreet, which are basically companies that sell data at large scale globally. And you had a lot of conversations around the world when you were also part of that team talking to customers. And I think that's where you recognized that it's not an easy sell to sell data. Is that right?
Yes. And it was from those experiences at Nielsen, at Dun & Bradstreet, at these iconic world-class data companies. You go into a discussion, and I was in sales marketing strategy at those companies. And basically, if I kind of look back at my career, all I did there that was successful was help them put better stories together. Right. Ways to explain the value of what they could deliver to the business side, which eventually had to fund or use it. And I learned the hard way. I have some of those anecdotes in the book, going up to the head of sales of this one organization, explaining what we had at Nielsen, and having him lean back in his chair and just go, I have no idea what you're talking about. All I got to do is sell more product. I don't understand how this helps me sell more product. In that meeting, I was sitting next to an IT person who I had already convinced, who said, oh yeah, bring this in. You help me talk to the head of sales. So it was a big failure for both of us. It was a long, quiet drive home to the airport that day. And another kind of soul searching moment of, I got to get better at this, better explaining why data is important for an organization, which is a really high level, highly conceptual conversation. And we know to be successful in data management, you need stakeholder engagement, you need executive support, you need ongoing funding, and you're not going to get those things unless you're able to put together a narrative that the business understands, that the company understands. I don't even want to segregate, business versus IT, business versus data, as we often do. The company that you belong to, the enterprise that you're working at, needs the value of what your data management work can do, and that company just go in assuming they don't understand it. They don't understand what you're talking about. It's not cool. It's not sexy. As you mentioned, it's not tangible. You don't really see the results of bad data. You kind of feel them. And it becomes very challenging and very difficult to kind of nail that messaging.
Absolutely. And I think one of the problems that we also have is that it's like, you said it's not tangible, but it's also very hard to see who's accountable and does that person do their job, because the accountability is spread around the organization in a way. Like if you as a salesperson don't bring in the sales, it's very clear who didn't bring in the sales.
Exactly.
When data is not right, then there can be millions of reasons, and and there's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of people who just duck down and basically pretend that they didn't hear that data is not good because they they don't they don't want that like maybe it has bad consequences on them because they need to clean up stuff that is costly, that takes time. It's nobody likes to clean up the mess that you created, and often you inherit mess as well.
Sure.
So it's a difficult situation you're in when you want to tell stories around data management.
I agree. That's why I thought it was worth putting a whole book behind it and giving people some techniques, some frameworks, some approaches, some tips, what I think is some really concrete, practical advice, because that's all I did my whole career. So for 30 years, I'm talking to people and getting them to go from, I have no idea what you're talking about, to how do we live without this? And it's that soft skill part of the space that most people don't learn naturally as part of their data career.
And I think that is in particular true also for and a problem for data leadership, you know, because we are trained as managing the how of data, and you very nicely put that in the book. You know, it's about the why and the how of data, and the how is not a problem. It's about the why. Now, all we learn in our career as data professionals is the how, because
Sure.
it's really complex. I mean, we go through university, a lot of us do PhDs. Even if you have a great academic background on data, it's still a lot of learning in practice because you have all these tools. But at the end, it doesn't help you as a leader to tell your story, to explain the why. It just, you can explain maybe the how, okay-ish, but that's not really interesting.
No.
So what I found is like after reading your book, that you're sort of the why guy of data.
That's a nice moniker. I'll take that. I'll take that tagline too. And I over rotate on the why just sometimes for dramatic effect, but certainly for emphasis there.
And I don't think you do. I think you're absolutely right. And I think I've been wrong throughout my career to underemphasize the why and overemphasize the how.
It depends on the audience. If you're talking to a lot of practitioners, to technical folks who are trying to get it done, then you do need that practical practitioner knowledge. But that you're talking to your own team, you're talking to your own group. You're not debating existentially the value of what it is you're doing. You're getting the project done. But when you're going for funding every year and they're wondering why they even have a line for data or data management, and meanwhile operations doesn't have to explain why it exists, finance doesn't have to explain why, right? Legal doesn't have to explain, marketing doesn't have to explain. So it's the weird space, part of the space that we're in as data folks, that we're still at a point where we have to continually remind people why all of this is important.
And it seems like people forget. The next day you need to remember them and come up even with a better why. And I think part of that is because creating progress in data takes so much time, in particular when you want to do that at scale. And people are of course quite impatient. I mean, when you invest in sales or marketing, you see usually a return on invest quite fast. In data, it takes years, and it's also hard to prove that it's because of the data that things are better.
Often there's not a direct cause and effect relationship, especially in the data management side.
Yeah.
I put in $1 million here. Did I get, $2 million of value? It's infrastructure. It's foundational. It helps the good news is it helps the entire enterprise.
It does.
The bad news is it's hard to prove that.
Right.
And when things do help an entire enterprise, it's rare that any department's going to step up and go, okay, I'll fund that.
Yeah.
The opportunity there, however, and I learned this through my years at Nielsen and D&B, is that it can, if put in the right context, raise the level of the conversation to the audience at an enterprise that does care about the whole company. So C-level, CEO level, that level, and you get that opportunity to do your pitch, to tell your story. And I talk about in the book, it's like, get ready for that. Get ready for the CEO to look at you and go, okay, Why am I doing this? So it's a, I don't know if it's probably a triple-edged sword at this point in terms of all the different ways that it can cut. But we know, and part of my inspiration to do the book was this career of dealing with data leaders, data practitioners at all levels, at every kind of company, at every stage of maturity in all different categories across the world, and noticing this dual emotion that they carried, which was an incredible passion for the value and power of what data could do for their organization, coupled with this intense frustration that nobody was listening to them. So I tried to tap into that and say, let me help you with the second part. Let me help you with the get the attention.
Right.
Get that engagement, get somehow somebody go, oh, tell me more.
And there is an irony in all of this, because if you look into the newspapers, if you look into a Harvard Business Review for the past 10 years, if you look into the conversations that board members have, it's a lot about technology, about digitization, and in particular about data and AI and analytics. It's not that it's not part. I mean, it used to be, something that only specialists used to talk about. I mean, now with generative AI, like even your grandparents talk about it.
The hottest topic.
Everyone is talking about it.
Well, look at this. It knocked data mesh off the front page finally.
Totally, yeah. But even throughout the last years, it's not like data has been not a subject of interest. It's been a subject of interest, but and a lot of executives were saying data is really important. But then when you come up with your data management program, that is a different story, because I think people are fascinated about using data. People are not so fascinated about managing data.
That's a good point. There is an irony there. That the profile and the focus on data in general is a lot higher and a lot sharper than it's been over the last decades, yet we still struggle with these same fundamental challenges. But it's, and so you use analogies, you use metaphors, you use, in that case, it's like people they really want the meal, but they don't care about cooking it, or they really want this delicious dish, but they don't realize it's got to have good ingredients. You just try and remind people there's cause and effect here, to bring up, the most overused term in the data space. It's garbage in, garbage out. It's rubbish in, rubbish out. I even talk about that in the book. I talk about it in all my sessions, that even though that's so true, even though that's an irrefutable law of the data space, it's like gravity. What goes up must come down. What goes in must come out. That doesn't drive any action on its own. It just ends up being a snide remark by the IT guy in the back of the room when the dashboard blows up and they go, well, garbage in, garbage out. I told you. You got to sell this in. The story I tell people they need to tell is not some long winding narrative. It's not a mystery novel. It's a pitch. You got to pitch this stuff. You got to sell it in. And I think sales is a good thing. I don't see it as a negative. But those techniques of capturing somebody's attention, developing their interest, nurturing that desire, and getting them to take action, that's the natural progression that all ideas go through. And you got to understand those steps. I talk about those in the book too. And just trying to give people tools to just be as successful as I know they can be in the data space. Because they got the goods. They got the how. They know how to get it done. They just don't know the why part and why it's important to the rest of the organization.
And you just started to explain, you started to point out a few things that are currently wrong with data management storytelling, and maybe we can uncover some of these things. We probably all seen them, all of us, all our listeners probably have also seen not so good data management stories being told, because they were maybe too complex, they were not really tangible. Where do you see, the current state of data storytelling, and where do you see the flaws?
I hope it's getting better. I hope some of my work and some of the work of my peers out there is helping folks, but you still hear One thing I pick on a lot is this notion of data quality. Of course, it's important. Of course, you have to measure it, but that's not your pitch. Data quality doesn't sell.
Right.
If data quality sold as a concept, we wouldn't be in the data quality mess we're in today, because the problems with data quality are, frankly, older than computers, even. People dealing with duplicates and misspellings and all that basic.
That's true. I mean, because people had databases on paper before they had computers.
Yeah. I mean, data's older than
Yeah.
electricity. People have been keeping lists of things. So just jumping and say, we have a data quality program. We want a data hygiene program. We have to take this initiative for data cleansing. All those words, quality, cleansing, hygiene, those are emotional, tactical, project-oriented, sometimes clerical. There certainly aren't a way to get excited. If you want to clear the conference rooms, tell everybody you're going to start a data hygiene program. They're all going to run for the doors. Even governance, people kind of pick on that too. It just sounds like heavy, restrictive, keeping people in boxes. You got to have rules. You got to have governance. You got to have procedures. You have to have standards. But it is in how you position it. So I counsel people right away, don't talk about data quality. It's not going to get you there. Think through your story before you tell it. Why do you need better data quality? Well, because we're implementing this new quote to cash program. We've just licensed the global instance of a CRM platform. We're trying to change our entire business model to go from selling widgets to licensing the value of a widget as a service. Whatever all those things are, that's what you point at to say, we need the data to back up those ideas. We need the data foundation to support these initiatives that in a lot of cases the organization's already signed off on. And when you roll out a new ERP system and it blows up, guess what? Nobody blames the software. It's rare that it's the software's fault, even because the data sucked going into it. Well, it demoed great. Well, guess what? Everything demos great because the data's perfect in the demo. So think about where
right.
some of these big ideas are going to bring your company, and just get into that conversation, get into the room where it happens, as a great storyteller has already put to music, and get your story as part of that. That's a lot easier to be a line item in a currently supported initiative than to have a separate, address cleansing program that looks disconnected.
I think that's a very important, I would call it even a tactic or maybe strategy, like rather than trying to create something that is of medium size on its own, rather tie in something smaller to something bigger that is already out there, something that the company wants to do anyway. And the truth is, whatever a company wants to do, most likely they need better data to be able to do that.
Exactly.
There's a high chance.
If it has to do with your relationships, if it has to do with your brands, if it has to do with distribution, merger and acquisition, there's a data play in every one of those things.
Yeah.
Finding that connection and exposing it and showing the true cause and effect is where you start to get the support. Oh, gee, I didn't realize we needed that. Yeah, it's the ingredients you've been talking about. You've been talking about having this big picnic and nobody's thinking about buying the food. It's just whatever analogy you got to use. We just want to build a bridge, but nobody realizes we need standardized nuts and bolts to put the bridge together. Pick an analogy. There's just a million of them.
And which means, that means also, and probably that, well, it's not probably, it's quite frankly, it's a must that you find a good focus for your data management. I think one of the fundamental problems that we have with data management programs is that they don't focus enough. They try to solve the world. And I think that per se, if you choose that path to connect to a bigger thing that the company is doing, you have a focus. You don't need to find that focus. You have a why. You don't have to find that why. You just need to connect it properly.
Exactly. Everything we do in data should enable the strategic intentions of your enterprise. Otherwise, you're wasting your time.
Yeah. Now, one of the things practically, as a leader, but also as a, for the past, how long has been that? I probably for the last 8 years, I've been working as a data leader, before as a consultant. But in both worlds, I found that sometimes connecting to something bigger can be difficult out of politics because somebody else owns that program, So one of the things that of course is a challenge, but it's something that can work out, is that you need basically to convince the people running that program to actually bring you on board, because it brings value to them, and they will probably have a very tough time without you once they try to implement that. And you basically do the work that they don't want to do. They just want to, focus on the results and not so much on the groundwork that is needed. Is that something did you experience that? I mean, I experienced that quite a lot of times. When you want to connect something into something that is owned by somebody, there's also some territorial behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it's just natural human nature, going into, as a consultant. I was a consultant a little more deeply than I am now. Now I just do shows with brands. I do all the fun stuff I ever did. But when I was, on site being consultative with companies, whether it was on my own or with representing some of these other data brands, yeah, there's all kinds of, it's kind of humorous after a while. It's like going to somebody's house for dinner and seeing, these two don't get along, and this uncle's nuts, and these people don't know what they're talking. You just see it so plainly when they don't see it. But that's just work. I mean, every organization's got that. That's the nature of large enterprises, and in a lot of cases, it's going to be that way no matter what part of the organization you're in. If you're trying to move something along. I mean, I worked at, looking at Dun & Bradstreet, who's a data company. Not like we say now, everybody's a data company, everybody's an AI company. No. If you make data for a living and you license data to get revenue for what I would consider data products, capital D, capital P, rather than what we call data products today, kind of that internal terminology. I was there to tell better data. I was there to help D&B tell a better story about something they already did, something that they were world-class at, something that their clients already realized had value. And my first 2 weeks there, I met up with a bunch of the master data clients. In this case, it was master data. So D&B has a unique identifier. They got a matching process. They have hierarchies. They have everything you need to have what I eventually branded for them as pre-mastered content. Easy way to think about it. If you understand what master data is, then this is pre-mastered. We did it already. Oh, I don't have to do it myself? Yeah, here, we'll do it for you. Simple way to talk about it at a cocktail party. And a 8-figure client said to me, I know why I'm buying it, but they don't know why they're selling it to me. And that's just a horrifying story. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that conversation. And because she realized, okay, I get it. I could tell this story. And there were pockets of folks who understood it, but the company as a whole didn't. And for instance, the words master data were not even on the website. Couldn't find it anywhere. 100 tabs, million screens, all this other stuff. And I finally got up to the CEO at Dun & Bradstreet, and he goes, well, what do you think our problem is? I said, we do everything great in this space except for how we talk about it. Now, the political side of it, there's lots of people there in marketing and customers. I'm trying to create a narrative, and I'm trying to scale that. And there was a ton of politics in that place from people who didn't want somebody else to tell a story. Not that they had one, but it was just this political dynamic of, no, you're supposed to be working on go-to-market. You're supposed to be working on this. You're supposed to be. I said, I'm just here to just explain this in a simple way. So you're going to run into politics everywhere. That's what I kind of figure.
That's true. It's human. And in data, it's getting often even more political than in politics sometimes, because it's so cross-departmental. Per se, data cuts through departments. It's not and basically as a data leader, you don't own anything. You don't own the data because it belongs to different teams in the company. Where you don't own the business. Like even if you improve something in the business, you don't own that improvement. So I think you run into these sort of, if you have to deal with politics every day, and you have to. Tom Redmond said, like, you need to go over it. You need to basically embrace it to be able to succeed as a data leader. Like, you can't fight it because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
you just need to accept it as a fact of life. And
be a good politician. How about that?
Yeah.
And work it. Lobby, work it, get in front of people.
Lobby
part of what I did
you believe in, bring in alliances.
At Dun & Bradstreet, just sort of as an allegory, was I spread this story I had. I went to the head of legal and said, hi, do you have your team in for lunch? I'll talk to them. Nobody goes to legal and says, let me talk to you about, something and they're like, wow. And so I started to just expand in the reach of this very simple concept that put a wrapper around what the company did. And the two sort of ends of the spectrum compliments I got that really stuck with me is when I was rolling this thing out, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, I've been here for 30 years. That's the clearest explanation of what we do in this space I've ever heard. A month later, I'm speaking to the summer interns, and two of them come up to me afterwards and say, now I understand what the company does. So I know I'm on to something. Politics aside, but take these ideas that I'm talking about as my day-to-day life at Dun & Bradstreet, and put your own self in that seat and think about data in general and the story you're trying to tell, and know that you've got to tell it at all levels. It's vertical up and down, it's horizontal side to side. A version of your data management story should be in front of almost everybody.
And through such work, you also started to crystallize out as like underlying basic data management story, as far as I understood from the book. So what do you think data management is about? I think I found it very fascinating how you describe data management.
For me, it boiled down my entire data philosophy down to 3 words: truth before meaning. You got to determine the truth in data before you derive meaning. Obviously, I'm on the truth team, hence the meaning of my truth hat. For those of you watching, can see I have that on. But it's where data starts. Things like foundation, structure, standards. For me, that's all part of that data story, that data management story, and how it connects to. We've been talking about how it connects to a lot of things. Really laying out that not always obvious connection between this fundamental core data work and the future of the company. You don't want to go too far on the hyperbole and say, we're going to go out of business without this, but we may not be in the business we want to be if we don't have it. And
it's about making these cause and effect relationships more visible. And I remember, I think one thing that I remember from the book is that you really put let's have a standard on how we look at things together. Like when we talk about customer, when we talk about a product, when we talk about relationships of the most important things that are our business, we need to talk the same language, and data needs to talk the same language. That's something that you put right in the middle. Is that right? Yeah.
And it's how, all based on the basic data management principles. We need business glossary, you need a data dictionary, you need, all those standardized terminology. If you don't have all that, you're not going to get there. And I back it up with this, somewhat pithy approach I call the 3 V's of data storytelling. Obviously a play on the 3 V's from Doug Laney for big data. But mine are vocabulary, voice, and vision. You got to have an accessible vocabulary. You got to speak the language of the business. Everybody's going to understand the terminology. Don't use technical jargon. Don't use cleansing. Use standards, structure, interoperability, these, action words, the words that people realize, okay, that's going to give me something. You want to harmonize to some sort of common voice. What's the way you're talking about this? Does your whole team understand it? Do you have this little elevator pitch? Do you have the right analogies, the right imagery? Don't use stuff that you just see on LinkedIn. Don't go in, unless you're an oil and gas company, don't say data's the new oil. Okay. Do me a favor. Say no to Ditno. It just doesn't play. And then you want to point all this at the vision of the company. And I bridle a little bit when I hear too much talk about what's our data strategy, because it's the business strategy. It shouldn't be separate at all.
It's more about the role of data for the business strategy.
Exactly. And then the techniques on how to draw those connections, those cause and effect. So vocabulary, the words you use, voice, the way you talk about it, and vision, why it's important.
And how it connects, how data and the vision of the company connect, basically. Right. But, and I found one thing, language is very, very important because we are humans. And I think without language, we wouldn't be humans, basically, quite frankly speaking. So language and the words you choose can make or break anything you do.
Exactly.
And I think that's why I find it actually quite important that you put vocabulary and voice, which are sort of connected,
Sure. Yeah,
what you
all
say,
three
how
of these
you
are
say
connected
that.
to each other, for sure.
Yeah. But what you say and how you say that and which words you choose is so important. Now, what I found in practice is, and that's maybe one of the fundamental sort of flaws of data storytelling, by the mainstream, by most of us, in the discipline, is that we choose vocabulary that is completely not fitting into the normal vocabulary of the other people who are doing business in the company.
True. Think of yourself as a doctor. If you're a doctor and you're talking to another doctor, you're going to use terminology that the patient's never going to understand.
Yeah.
Or a lawyer, same thing, any kind of professional. But then when you talk to your client or your patient, you have a different kind of language you use. If you ever sat in court, there are words that they use that you think mean something and they mean the opposite. They mean totally different. And everybody up there knows what they mean. And that happens in the data space. We walk in there and it's like, if we're going to do an analytics graph hub fabric mesh and it's not ETL, it's reverse ETL, or no, it's ELT, or it's just like, what? And you just lost everybody who you need to be successful. So the place for it is that vocabulary is super important. The words we use are important, and use the business terminology that's out there. And you don't have to make it up. There's a tip I give is look at the nomenclature and whatever form of jargon is standard in your vertical, in your sector. Right. There's usually some set of stuff. Coming from Nielsen, it was really important when talking to a branded manufacturer that customer means retailer, consumer means the end user. Right. And there were people who would walk into an organization and start talking about customers and they mean consumers, and you're confusing people right away. I mean, that's, I don't know if that's the same everywhere, but I know in that world, it was very specific. Yes. And understanding that, just, if you're fluent in somebody's language, they understand you better. This is not new. I didn't make all this stuff up, right? I'm just sort of applying some, as you suggest, basic principles about being human to this very niche space in the data world. But reminding
we forgot about these basic. We forgot about these principles. Yeah. Well, so tell me a bit about voice. Can you give me one or two examples? Us a few examples or one good example. Of what we need to watch out on voice.
A good area. That's great. Good area. There's a lot of pieces to it, but a good one I talk about a lot is just kind of the analogies you use, the imagery you use, the poetry, for lack of a better word, that you use to describe this stuff. So not every, people use analogies, they use metaphors and that sort of thing. And I pick on data's the new oil a lot because there's such confusion about what that really means. Does that mean it's got to be refined to be valuable, or no, it's not like oil because oil's not sustainable. This debate back and forth proves to me that it's bad poetry because there's not an immediate recognition of what that means. So a trick or a tip to find the right set of imagery is look at what your business does for a living. If you're a healthcare company, data is the lifeblood of our organization. A healthy business runs on healthy data. Fine, everybody gets it. If you are a logistics company I worked with, and they talked a lot about, we created kind of a storyline around you're moving data from one point to another. We have to understand what's in that package, data package, where it's going, what the provenance is. We're tracking it through the pipeline. It's like, all right, I get it. It's like what we do for a living is how we describe data. There was a CDO of a water utility that I heard speak, and he talked about how, well, we filter it. We've got a pure source. When you turn on the tap, it's always there. It's dependable. It's potable. It's okay. Oh, I get it. So think about that, because everybody already knows. You go in with the assumption, which is fairly safe, that people in your company know what your company does for a living. And then, take your company's slogan and play with it and replace the word data, replace some word in there with the word data, play around with that and see if you have like an internal slogan for what you do. It can backfire. There was a guy from a tobacco company, and he started talking to me about how data's like fresh air. You want to breathe it into your lungs. You want to make sure it's clean. I'm like, don't go there. It's not gonna work with this crowd. That's the wrong way to go. But all kidding aside, it's simple, and don't make it too complicated, and don't make it so you've got to, the reason you use these techniques, the reason you use metaphors and similes and analogies is to shorten the distance for people to understand what you're talking about. So complicated ones are working against you. It's got to be something that people, really understand.
And guess what? Most of our data storytelling is too complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something I see all over the place. And I've been doing too many times, not telling too complicated stories. Now, how do you create more clarity? How do you simplify the complex without making it sound completely naive or wrong? Or
I guess the naive part that's definitely a danger. But if you're talking at a very high level to a broad audience, simplification is going to work more for you than against you. One thing I do is I literally decide, I try to cut out words. Like, what's the fewest number of words I can use? Right? Truth before meaning. I didn't just come up with that. It was longer before. It was more complicated before. It's like, I can't cut another word out of that. I got it down to its atomic level. That's it. So for me, that's a good tagline and a good premise to hang a lot more discussion on. And I found people leave my events and they'll do a post or they'll write me something and they'll say, well, the big takeaway I had was truth before meaning. I go, okay, because that's, fit that on a fortune cookie. But I looked at a good example of some work I did. I worked with this bakery company. They brought me in. They were having they were actually rolling out a brand new enterprise sales system. They had technology, they had a bunch of methodology, they had some cultural change stuff. They said, we want you to come and just sort of reinforce the necessity of having this foundational structural data. I was talking obviously to, preaching right to the choir for this group that brought me in. And we actually came up with this very simple graphic that we knew everybody would understand. We said, okay, they had spent all day talking about all this great stuff. We said, all right, the end result, let's just sort of think of this symbolically as you want to deliver a great sandwich to your client base. Now, you want to deliver that sandwich. Everybody knows what a sandwich is. Backing it up, to create that sandwich, we have to bake the bread. We have to have the right delivery. We've got all these processes we do to cook and make this ingredients that go into the sandwich or make the sandwich. And then but then we backed it up again and said, but you need to have good flour, good yeast, clean water. You need those ingredients before that. So you're not going to get a sandwich unless you've got high quality ingredients. Simple idea. They probably still use this very simple graphic of like a picture of a bunch of flour and water and yeast, a baker, and then a sandwich. It was like, how little can I use to explain it? But it kind of nailed it again at a symbolic level.
right.
And you could show this cause and effect relationship. So I wouldn't worry too much about being naive. Probably the naivete probably shows itself more when you're describing how something gets done and you don't know what you're talking about versus why it's important, where that very nature of that is a more conceptual discussion.
I think there is a critical moment. And by the way, I fully agree with what all you said. Like it's brilliant. But there is this critical moment when you turn from the why to the how and to delivery. And I mean, I've been through that. You tell executives a wonderful story that is simple, that uses analogies. And then once you're in delivery, they turn those analogies against you and they start explaining you your world. But wait a minute, you said the ham goes into the sandwich. Now you're putting the ham to the side. And that can become complicated because then, of their world, all the data world is that sandwich for them. And now you have to say, but now we have this other role, which is like a database, and we need that on top. And
I get it. So I'm not in the room during those discussions. I'm gone already.
Yeah, that's what I'll tell you. I've been through that.
I mean, I used to go back to my Dun & Bradstreet days. I would go into these kind of command performance meetings and whip everybody up and talk symbolically and bring all this imagery. Afterwards, it happened multiple times. The account people would say, "Oh, the client loved it. They want you on the account." I go, "No, they don't. No, they don't want me on the account. That was it. You saw what I do. You don't want me touching anything." They said, "But you really get it." I said, "Yeah, I know I get it at a cocktail party level. Okay. I get it at a conversational level, but I appreciate the compliment, but that's not my lane. I know my position. I think I play it really well, but I stick to it." And, that's definitely a challenge. I'm really thin, really broad, but somebody's got to get it going. I kind of feel like, all right, let me get it going for you. Let me get some excitement. Let me get some engagement. Let me get some people thinking that this is important. Then take over, get it done.
And at the end, it's what you actually saying is we need to specialize, because it's very difficult to be great in all of these things. So probably we need a diverse team in any data team of people who have the skills that you have, and try to, that really have the passion for really telling a great story, engaging people. And then you need maybe some people who understand, how to execute the technology and how to deliver things. I think we need that combination of people. And maybe that's something for data leaders to think through when you're hiring people and developing your leadership team that works for you. Maybe at least one person should have that skill set, rather than putting it all into different kind of type of things like data quality, data architecture, and so on.
It's a good point. If you plotted kind of the personality aspects and kind of strengths in some sort of, test, which, those standardized tests, probably sort of great storytellers and kind of folks who do what I do are probably on one quadrant versus, okay, great, data practitioners might be in a totally the opposite quadrant, because the techniques and, the talents you need to really actually do that work are at times very different than the talents you need to talk about that work.
Very, very different.
So it's definitely a team approach.
And you need to continue talking about it while you deliver. So I really believe that's maybe what you publish as a book. Maybe that's also a good book to start a new profession. The data storyteller.
For data management, yes.
For data management. Great. Let's finish up with maybe one last piece of advice you give to data leaders in their first 100 days. Like from the craft that best, which is
it would be
engaging people.
Yeah, just reinforce that. Just learn your company's story and learn, and then write your data chapter in that company's story, and think about ways to communicate it in a simple, business accessible fashion. You're going to be up there. If you're a data leader, if you're a CDO, if you're a VP of data, if you're running the data office, you need to be better at these soft skills. And leaders tend to be, great leaders are good at the soft skills. Talk about irony. People have talked about it before. The soft skills are pretty hard. And know that you're up against some pretty good storytellers in your organization.
Oh, yeah.
Who will, everything being equal, beat you at storytelling. If you're up against the head of marketing, they do stories for a living, right? That's what they do. If you're up against the head of sales, they don't tell a story. They don't make quota. So and a tip I have is go partner with those folks to help you put the story together, because they are good at it. Talk to the head of communications, talk to the head of sales, get better at this kind of communication aspect of it. And that's what helps inspire people. And as a leader, you want to inspire people to do better, to see the possibilities out there, to view through the fog, look around the corner, all the ways people talk about. good leadership. And it comes down to that communication aspect. So work
Wonderful.
work on your communication skills. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
What that's
Great. Wonderful. Scott, that was brilliant. And I think that was of immense value for all data leaders and everyone who's an aspiring data leader. And I think it's been inspiring, and it's also giving me hope.
good. We need hope. Yes.
Because I think that's maybe one of the fixes we can do, to by really investing into communication, into storytelling, into maybe finding alliances of people who are better than us in storytelling,
right,
and getting them involved. I think that can really help us to unlock a lot of things.
Super. This has been a fun conversation, Alex. If any of your folks want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on YouTube, Scott Taylor, Data Whisperer. My website's MetaMetaConsulting.com. And hopefully,
and telling your data story is your book. You find it everywhere. Thank you so much for being with us, Scott. It's been a brilliant conversation. Take care.
Borek Data Masterclass, where great data journeys begin.